Nestled into the foothills of northeast Kentucky rests a community that, to a casual person's eye, seems a bit sleepy. If one would take the time to have a deeper look at this city, then you will find a deep documented history. Morehead, Kentucky, and Rowan County have a history that one would think was created by a fiction writer. The town, which currently sits at about a population of 8,000 people, has a history that would rival any town in America. The town and region has endured frontier struggles, a famous feud, a 100-year flood that nearly wiped the entire town out, and the changing landscapes of a rural economy. At the heart of all of this history lies one town square and a courthouse. The area nestled perfectly in the center of Main Street has bore witness to a story that is beyond belief. The Rowan County Courthouse and Square is just a little more than an acre, but has served as a memorial to veterans, a gathering place for stories, election day discussion, and of course, the historical center of the town's business and legal needs. The square has seen the struggle from Civil War marauders that came and burned the courthouse down, to eventually, in 1899, building the structure that we all know today as the Rowan County Arts Center. The building that stood on the square since the Edwardian times has had a few facelifts in its nearly 120-year history, but still serves the people of this famed populace as well as it did in the late 1890s.
Standing in the middle of the original Rowan County Courthouse Square in Morehead, Kentucky. Upwards of 163 years ago, in 1856, the General Assembly carved out another new county here from parts of Fleming to the north and Morgan to the south of the East Fork of Triplet Creek. This square, a little more than an acre, near the center of the county, was stepped off by Colonel John Hargis, the new county attorney and a member of the legislature. He was a recent arrival from Breathitt, and he and his family shaped this county's history for a generation. Hargis built the first courthouse to stand here of logs felled in the nearby woods. He also put up the town's first hotel and store, which also held the tavern and the post office, just over there on land that he owned nearby. This ground has a long and remarkable history. The county clerk was murdered here in 1863 by rebel marauders in search of horses during the Civil War. Confederate guerrillas burned the first courthouse in the spring of 1864. The Election Day riot that touched off the Rowan County War happened here too, and more killings would follow. Sensational trials occurred here as well, including one in which a mule was brought up the front staircase and into the courtroom on the second floor up there as Exhibit A. It was here that the community turned out as governors and senators and other politicians came to sway voters. And here the courthouse bell called the town together to hear jury verdicts and election results. Before the town had its first church, people came here to worship and to get married, and on occasion to hold funerals for their dead. Much more than the seat of local government, the courthouse and this ground on which it stands were the very heart of this community for 125 years.
I'm Stephen Middleton.
And I'm Harvey Pennington.
And I'm J.D. Reader. Join us for the next 50 minutes as we explore the history as well as some of the mystery of this place. And listen to the echoes from the halls of the old Rowan County Court House.
The current Rowan County Arts Center looks out upon a modern Moorhead, Kentucky. A Moorhead with steady traffic, business, and right behind it, a pinnacle of higher education in Moorhead State University. But where did all of this begin? And how did we end up with an arts center in what was once the town center for the county? Stephen Middleton here with J.D. Reader in the historic Rowan County Court House, now the Rowan County Arts Center, where there's been a lot of history take place over the years. J.D., I understand that there used to be a community here called Triplet. Is that right?
That is right, Steve. There was a community called Triplet as early as 1817. That's the year that a post office was established here. And the community was named for the creek. There probably were a few settlers here at least as early as 1810 because of information we've been able to glean from the early census records.
Yeah, so let's jump to around 1856. Did the Civil War play a prominent part here in the county and this grounds that we are on currently?
In Rowan County, as far as Civil War activity involving regular troops, whether federal or Confederate, the answer to that would be that it was minimal. There was one skirmish in the summer of 1863 at a bridge across Triplet Creek a few miles west of town that involved Union and Confederate forces. But there were other times when there was war activity in the area that had, I think, a greater impact on the local population, and that was due to raids by guerrillas and home guard units who were scavenging for horses and food and money and other usable things.
There's the cabin. We can go up there and warm up. They got a fire going. That's where we're supposed to meet everybody.
This sounds good to me. If I stay out here much longer, I'll be stiff as a poker.
So tell me, what's the matter with you? Come on, get it out. You've been quiet the whole time.
Nothing, I don't reckon.
Well, I'll tell you what, you sure been down in the mouth about something. I usually can't ever get you to shut your mouth. Now you just ain't got nothing to say.
Well, I'm just sick of all this. I just want to go home, you know, see my farm, my family, if I even got one.
Well, that ain't our fault. That's them Yankees. You know, we got our orders to do, and we all want to go home, but we can't right now. We got to go out, we got to find supplies for our army, for our men, we got to find horses, we need horses, money, and food, and clothes.
I'm just tired of hurting people, killing people, just like yesterday. That poor man, you shot him and we took his horses. He could be crippled for life.
Well, let me tell you something, he picked the wrong side to be on, you know, and that was just his bad luck. I ain't worried about that, and you don't need to be worried about it either. You need to be worried about what's going to happen tomorrow. We got to go in town. We're going to burn the courthouse down. Because that's our orders.
We're going to do what?
We're going into town, and we're burning the courthouse. That's our orders. We got orders. We don't complain about it. They tell us what to do, and we do it. We're soldiers.
I'll just be glad when this is all over.
Well, I'll be glad too. But until then, we got our orders and we got to keep them.
Local farmers who didn't want to cooperate were harassed. Some were killed, some were maimed for life. The county court clerk, Edward Logan, was murdered in the fall of 1863 on the courthouse square where he had set up a table and was trying to enroll people in Union militia units. an invading guerrilla force led by a notorious Confederate fellow named Sid Cook from Virginia swept into town and caused all manner of chaos and took the county clerk's life as it happened. And hard feelings that resulted from the war continued to affect the politics in this county for generations after the war was over.
What about Colonel Hargis? Who was Colonel Hargis, and what was Colonel Hargis' role here in the city and the town?
I think it would be fair to say that Colonel John Hargis was the first entrepreneur, the first developer, the first person who really came here with the intention of putting Morehead literally on the map. He left Breathitt County and came to Morehead intent upon becoming influential in early affairs here as well. He was a member of the state legislature, so he had inside information on what was going to happen, where, and when it was going to happen. He wasn't the first resident by any means, but he was the first person to take advantage of the situation. He was Morehead's first lawyer, its first postmaster, its first tavern keeper, store owner, and first real mover and shaker in the business world.
So let's talk a little bit about the Rowan County Courthouse here. Originally, it was a log structure, correct?
That's right. Colonel Hargis actually built the first courthouse. It was a log building, very primitive, and nothing ornamental about it. It was intended to be entirely functional. That building was burned by Confederate guerrillas in March of 1864 and replaced by a two-story wood frame building that survived for a number of years. It was soon outgrown, and so they built next to it an annex that held the offices of the circuit and county court clerks. That separate building burned in November of 1880. We don't know the cause of that fire. It may have been deliberate. Both sides of the political fence accused the other of having done something deliberate to cause that fire. It may have been an accident. Who knows? Someone may have walked out of the building, left a lamp burning, and a cat or a rat jumped past the lamp, turned it over, and caused the fire. We simply don't know. The second courthouse was here until 1899, when it was pulled down when the third courthouse, which is now the building occupied by the Rowan County Arts Center, was erected. It served as the seat of county government for about 80 years, and more recent history has included another old courthouse on East Main Street, which is now university property, and the current courthouse on West Main Street.
So let's talk a little bit about the 20 years after the Civil War. That was a very interesting time here in the county, wasn't it?
The key event of the 1880s in Rowan County history would, of course, be the Rowan County War, sometimes called the Tolliver-Martin Feud. Sometimes other names are added to that. The Tolliver-Martin-Logan Feud. You could also add the name of Young to that mix as well. It was a family fight that was grounded in political rivalries originally. And the old courthouse square is an incredibly pivotal place in the unfolding of the story of the Rowan County War. If one looks for an exact beginning date and an exact ending date, you would point to August 4th, 1884 as the day on which it began. That was county election day back then. They favored August because it was thought that the roads would probably be in better shape, which would encourage more people to come into the community and cast their votes. The courthouse square was filled with people in all kinds of election activity. People were talking up their favorite candidates. People were drinking. Everybody nearly carried guns. It was a potentially dangerous mix. And in the middle of all of that hubbub, an argument that had happened the week before between two local men renewed itself. That led to name calling, which led to shoving and a fist fight, which led to rock throwing and bottle throwing, and before long somebody drew a gun and shots were fired. And the first shots fired led to other shots being fired, and quite literally when the smoke cleared, there was a man lying dead on the ground and another man was wounded. Testimony from witnesses as to who killed the man who was dead on the ground, whose name was Solomon Bradley, were in exact conflict along strict party lines. The Republican witnesses blamed a man named Floyd Tolliver, who was a town trustee at Farmers down on the Licking River, a surveyor. He owned a hotel in Farmers. He was a person of some prominence. And the Democrats who were witnesses all blamed John Martin, the son of an influential local farmer, a person of some note as well. These two men were both indicted for murder. The feeling was, we'll let a jury sort this all out when it's time for a trial. But of course it never came to trial. The two men managed to stay away from each other for a few months, but they met again in the bar room of a saloon across the street from the courthouse square. And at that point, Martin killed Tolliver and the feud was on. And for the next 2 years and 10 months, 20 people were killed in this county at the very least, and almost that many were wounded. It was a series of violent acts that occasioned acts of revenge and reprisal that went on for nearly 3 years and brought national attention to Morehead, attention that Morehead really didn't want in that way. The state militia was sent in here 3 times in order to restore order. I'm sure that every morning when Governor Proctor Knott woke up, the last thing he wanted to hear was that there was more trouble in Morehead for him to have to deal with. It was a perennial thorn in his flesh. Much of the action had something to do directly or indirectly with the courthouse square, because this was the place where people came to get their information. A case could be made for saying that the last killing that had a connection to the Rowan County War occurred on these grounds in 1921. The youngest member of the Tolliver family, who was an active combatant in the feud, Charles Ward Tolliver, whose nickname was Kate. Newspaper stories of the event at the time referred to it as the last killing that was feud related in Rowan County.
October 2nd, 1893 was an exciting year when the county clerk was murdered in this very building, correct?
That's absolutely right. There was a headline in the Mount Sterling paper that read, "Another Morehead killing." This was just a few years after the feud had ended. The memory of all of that was still fresh in everyone's mind. And in the courthouse at that time, there were 2 men who were on opposite sides politically. They each held county office. One was George Johnston, the county court clerk, and the other was Millard Fouch, who was the county sheriff. And before things were over, the sheriff had shot the county clerk twice. The first bullet entered his stomach and came out his back, and the second shot caught him just above the right eye. The sheriff was arrested and was tried in an adjoining county, in Bath County, on a change of venue, and was acquitted, probably because the county clerk would have had a pistol behind the counter and might have been going for that at the time that the sheriff shot him.
So some more lighthearted stories in history have happened here as well. Here there's a legendary story about a mule in a case here.
Yes, this is referred to locally by historian Jack Ellis as the case of the whopper-jawed mule. It occurred in the late 1930s. This was in an era in which the county judge was a judicial officer who actually held court and heard cases. And there was a dispute between 2 farmers over the recent purchase of a mule. When the purchasing farmer got the mule home, he discovered that the mule's jaws were so poorly aligned it could not gnaw corn off the cob, corn that had been dried for future use as feed for animals. In order to feed the mule, the corn had to be shelled and the mule had to be hand-fed. Well, the farmer who had bought him was a very practical-minded fellow who thought, no doubt, I can't afford to spend all my time coddling this mule. I was cheated and I want my money back. He said as much to the man that he had dealt with, who declined to give him his money back, saying, "You had a perfect opportunity to inspect your purchase. I'm not giving you anything." The other fellow pressed the issue and said he would take him to court, and his response was, "Well, do what you will." And so the case found itself on the docket in county court, and the evidence was brought into the courtroom, quite literally up the front steps of the courthouse as they existed at that time, and into the courtroom, which now serves as the auditorium at the Rowan County Arts Center. The judge examined the mule and concluded that the purchasing farmer who had the complaint did indeed have a cause that deserved to be redressed.
Other than a few scars that still remain around Moorhead and Rowan County, many have forgotten the events that happened in July of 1939. In a very tragic event, a catastrophic flood hit the region in the dead of night. Moorhead residents recall the sky getting dark around 2 p.m., with raindrops starting about 11, and continued downpours until the morning. The residents of Rowan County and Moorhead were awoken on the night of July 5th, 1939 by sirens and train whistles. Many knew the flooding was bad, but when the morning came, the sun showed a devastated region. The town was in ruin, with many businesses and homes washed away. 25 people in all lost their lives that July day.
This is the East Fork of Triplet Creek. It divides Rowan County in two and winds through the town of Moorhead. Today it is a picturesque, docile stream, ambling its way along, inviting a passerby to stop for a moment and skip a smooth, flat stone along its quiet surface. It's hard to imagine now, but on a hot July night in 1939, this tranquil little creek turned into a raging torrent, sweeping everything before it into a churning mass of destruction. Moorhead awoke on July 4th of that year to the sound of fire alarms, as a hotel and other buildings in the heart of town were reduced to charred rubble by daylight. When townsfolk were relieved to learn that no one had died in the fire, the mood lightened, and the Independence Day festivities went on as planned. At the end of the day, talk turned to the heat and the thickness of the air. And then around 11 o'clock, it began to rain. A steady, relentless downpour, the beginning of a storm, the power of which no one could imagine. After barely an hour, Triplet was out of its banks, and still the rains came down in a thick, insistent torrent. The little creeks poured into Triplet so fast that walls of water formed that came in waves roaring down the valley, filled with uprooted trees and houses now adrift, some with people clinging frantically to their rooftops. The whistles of freight trains began to sound the alarm. Altogether, 25 had drowned, over half of them less than 18 years old. Husbands and wives, mothers and children, 3 generations of the same family in some cases, all perished together. Mary Frances Salyers, just 25 years old, died with her 3 children, her mother and her brother, 6 of them in one family. Survivors and townspeople gathered in schools and churches and at the courthouse, clinging to each other for support, desperate to know who had made it through the night alive and to learn where the homeless could go for help. The Red Cross came in and property losses ran to more than $2 million. Just burying the dead was an overwhelming ordeal. Nearly 20 undertakers from surrounding counties had volunteered to help out. A local news writer tried to sound an optimistic note a few days later.
I can't express the horror or describe the living hell we've been through in the past few days. We're all footsore and weary, but we're going to have a bigger and better Moorhead. It will take time and patience and plenty of hard work, but we have all of that, and we are coming through. Woody Hinton.
Water was coming up fast in front of the post office, and houses were floating down between the railroad station and Main Street. Our house was still there, but it had moved 30 or 35 feet. The water was nearly 7 feet deep inside. Mud was half a foot deep on the floor. I'd never seen anything to compare with it. Margie Gullett.
It was July 4th in 39 when the flood fell from the sky. The thunder roared and the lightning flashed and the creek raised like a tide. At the carnival in Moorhead town, the people screamed in fear. Then they ran for the safety of higher ground, abandoning what they held dear. There was the roar of the torrent and the screams of the doomed and the terror in the dark as the waters rose like the hosts of hell and tore families apart. They climbed on the bed and up the stairs, they climbed out on the roof, and the waters kept coming, and they climbed in the trees, and they prayed to God for proof that He loved them still, and as people will, they promised to reform. But the lights were down in Moorhead town, and the raindrops tore like thorns. It was a moonless night, a starless night. The creek ran black and cold.
The courthouse and square has served multi-purposes in its long and storied history. Harvey Pennington served as Rowan County Attorney from 1971 to 1977, and then a much longer stint from 1982 to 2001. Harvey, who grew up in Moorhead, saw firsthand from a child through his formative years as the county attorney the role the old Moorhead courthouse played for citizens and the town's history.
Considering all of the business that was conducted in or centered around the old Rowan County Courthouse through the years, today's visitor would have a right to be shocked at its small size. This hallway, from the front door of the courthouse to its back door, is only about 100 feet in length, yet it led directly to the county sheriff's office, the treasurer's office, the county attorney's office, the county judge's office, the county court clerk's office, and the circuit court clerk's office. Its hardwood floors creaked from the foot traffic, and the familiar voices of those who entered to do business here echoed the entire length of the hallway. I'm aware of this because for the first 6+ years that I served as Rowan County Attorney, my office was in this courthouse. As a matter of fact, it was right here. This wasn't always the county attorney's office, however. Norman Wells, who lived just across Main Street from the courthouse, had served as Rowan County Sheriff about the time of World War I. He told me this had been the sheriff's office back then, and he mentioned when he and a deputy narrowly escaped being injured when much of its original plaster ceiling collapsed and fell to the floor. Although we were very busy in the old courthouse, the close proximity of the offices did allow for the different office holders and their deputies and assistants to visit and interact at different times. Of course, the population of the county was quite a bit smaller then, and the old courthouse served as an informal meeting place for some of the county's residents. There were benches in the courthouse hallway that accommodated those who entered and wished to linger or visit a while. And in the warmer weather, there were benches just outside between the back door of the courthouse and the jail, where some of the older men would sit and talk. And those who were so inclined might also pull out a pocket knife and do some whittling on a cedar stick, or cut a chunk from a plug of tobacco with the object of enjoying a chaw. During much of the early life of the old courthouse, especially before television became a common source of family entertainment, I was told that trials in the courtroom upstairs drew large audiences. Certainly, spectators at the trials were drawn there in part by the anticipated drama of the trials themselves, but undoubtedly they were fascinated by the fact that what they were observing was not fiction. It was real life unfolding as they watched. Now, during the years I served as county attorney, the old courthouse wasn't always a pleasant, friendly place to work. Sometime in the mid-1970s, because of its age and disrepair, the old jail was ordered to be closed and our prisoners had to be housed elsewhere. I remember a particular prisoner who had just been arrested by the sheriff and one of his deputies. They were preparing to transport him to another county jail. I was interviewing him in the county judge's office, which is over here, and which served as a small courtroom at times. He was obviously drunk and belligerent. He and I were sitting facing each other, and we were only about 3 to 4 feet apart. As I was looking at the paperwork I was preparing for his transfer, I was aware of a scuffle taking place and that the sheriff and his deputy were dragging the prisoner out of the judge's office. I didn't even look up. I thought the county judge had signaled them to remove him because he was intoxicated and cursing. Then the sheriff quickly returned from the hallway and asked if I were okay. I assured him that I was and asked why he wanted to know. That was when he told me that the prisoner had somehow managed to conceal a knife, a linoleum knife, I believe, and that during my questioning, the prisoner had pulled the knife and tried to stab me. That was when the sheriff and his deputy had grabbed him and dragged him from the room. Given the short distance between me and the prisoner that day, I felt quite fortunate that the sheriff and his deputy were so alert and so close. Now, during this time, the county judge, in addition to being a member of and presiding over the fiscal court, also had basically the same jurisdiction as that of today's district judges. That is, he presided over misdemeanor jury trials, conducted preliminary hearings in felony cases, and presided over hearings of cases involving juveniles. So, as I mentioned earlier, the county judge's office served as a courtroom of sorts for juvenile cases, but that office also had a large window which, on at least a couple of occasions, served as an escape exit for juveniles who had been brought before the judge. One of those was a young man who, after his hearing, was waiting to be transferred to a juvenile detention facility. After he fled out the window, his mother, who was upset, came into my office where his lawyer and I were seated and talking. She stood beside me, turned and placed her purse on the floor, and in one fluid motion, turned back around and hit me directly between the eyes with her fist. The other juvenile I can remember escaping from that window was a girl of about 15 years of age, who, as the deputy in pursuit reported, was very fast on her feet. The officer said he kept up with her pretty well in his cruiser while he was following her west on 2nd Street, but he knew he would probably be outclassed when he saw her turn and run up the creek by the old health department building. However, to his relief, the race came to a quick end when she didn't duck in time and struck her forehead against a limb that was hanging across the creek bed. It didn't completely knock her out, but it did addle her enough that the deputy had no trouble at all in taking her back into custody. Certainly the old courthouse building served as the center of Rowan County's political and judicial activity from the time of its completion in 1899 until the mid to late 1970s. At that time, however, concern over its structural integrity resulted in the upstairs, including the courtroom, being closed. Both the district and circuit court activities had to be temporarily relocated. Then, I believe it was in 1982, the district and circuit court offices and courtrooms, along with the various county offices, were officially moved into a different building, which had been purchased for and then specifically remodeled into a new courthouse. But the old historic courthouse, with all of its structural flaws, was still standing and about to enter a new phase.
With the closing of the now known Old Moorhead Courthouse and a new courthouse opening further down East Main Street, the old courthouse went into a period of very little to no use. The once proud structure sat dormant until a new plan for the structure was developed and implemented for a brand new arts center.
During the next 30 years, the old courthouse remained closed for the most part. And then in 2004, County Judge Executive Clyde Thomas called together a group of citizens representing the County Historical Society, the Community Theater, and 2 local arts organizations. He explained that the best chance for the building's long-term future would be to transform it into a community arts center. The cost would run to around $2 million, and the county would apply for a $1 million grant from the Paul and Lucille Caudle Little Foundation if the local arts groups could provide programming to keep the proposed Rowan County Arts Center alive and growing. The answer was an enthusiastic yes. A proposal was written, and several weeks later, word came that the grant was approved. The serious work of design and renovation began not long afterward, and 2 years later, the work was done. In the spring of 2007, the newly created Rowan County Arts Center was officially opened.
Basically, they were thinking about tearing down the courthouse, and the community didn't want that to happen. So a group of citizens, and I believe the judge executive at the time, met and decided that they wanted to save it and turn it into an arts center. And they were able to get grant funding, and the county matched the grant, and then it became the arts center.
I think the Art Center's importance in the community is it's a focal point in the center of downtown. From a tourism's perspective, it brings a whole new realm of art into tourism, and it opens up opportunities for people to express themselves through art. It brings visitors to town to watch them do this. I can't imagine Rowan County without art, and this is the prime location for that.
Sure. So talk a little bit about what the Rowan County Art Center offers. I know there's monthly exhibits, there's different events you all do here. What's some of the things that the Art Center can offer?
Well, we do offer monthly exhibits, and usually those are by local regional artists. A lot of times we are able to offer someone their first exhibit that maybe wouldn't have had another shot in a bigger, more competitive market, and it's just a way to bring the community together too, because a lot of times people don't know that this particular person had artistic talent, and there's always surprise, and there's something about seeing at the reception, like seeing their reaction to, hey, people came to see my artwork, I might be legit. It's a sweet moment, and I love being able to provide that. Along with the exhibits, of course, we offer events such as art classes. We have plays and concerts and all kinds of different events upstairs. Of course, we also have private events. We've had a lot of weddings and receptions and events like that. We also offer where we've turned the old county offices into artist studios. People have a chance to see artists working and doing their art and seeing some of their artwork, and it's just a neat experience.
So people can rent studio space here?
They can. I'm not going to lie, there's a waiting list, but yes, you can get on the list, and as artists rotate out, we just draw from the list.
And folks can come down here at any point and see the local artisans and artists actually creating. Right?
Now, it's kind of hit or miss because we don't schedule our artists. They rent their studio and they work when they want to work. But if you stop by and the doors are open, go right on in.
The rich history that involves around the Art Center, the rich history that the courthouse, everything involves about it. When I first started working with tourism, we still had the old seats in the courthouse. So that was a monumental thing, and then we opened it up and saw so many new opportunities. And tourism, we manage the Art Center part of it so that the folks that are volunteers can actually fundraise and find ways and look for outlets that can benefit the Art Center. We're invested in this, and I see us investing in this for years to come. I could say that if you come to Moorhead, you're definitely going to find your next adventure.
After 120 years of service, the old Rowan County Court House is now the Rowan County Arts Center. The future is bright for a town square and a historic building for a new generation to enjoy for hopefully another 120 years.
For 120 years now, this proud old building has stood here on Rowan County's historic Courthouse Square in the heart of the city of Moorhead. For just over 80 years, it was the county courthouse, and in times of prosperity and adversity, it bore witness to the ups and downs in community life as people came here to vote, pay their taxes, record their deeds, get married or unmarried, and attend the often exciting trials that took place in the courtroom upstairs. People flocked to this spot to hear rousing speeches as candidates tried to sway voters in every election. Some of Kentucky's most prominent politicians and orators spoke from these very steps. Alban Barkley was here, and Happy Chandler, and John Sherman Cooper and Louis Nunn. People came here to celebrate the end of wars and to honor those who served and those who died, as the monuments on the grounds proclaimed. They came here to worship as well, as the courtroom was often the scene of revival meetings on hot summer nights in bygone days. Confiscated moonshine stills were displayed here too, to satisfy the curious during the Prohibition experiment and afterward as the county remained legally dry sometimes, but some had a thirst for hard liquor anyway. Much of the great tapestry of community life in Moorhead was woven right here, just through those doors and on these grounds. And for just over a decade now, it has had a new purpose as the Rowan County Arts Center, where local artists, musicians, dancers, and actors enrich the cultural life of the community with exhibits in the gallery and performances on the stage. Once again, it has a purpose, and new voices mingle with those of the past to create new echoes from its historic hallways.
An old building, some say, an even smaller town, a square that is passed by cars, college students, and random foot traffic. A building in the new Rowan County Arts Center that's seen the passage of time, of a small frontier town to what is now one of the burgeoning communities of Northeast Kentucky. This old courthouse has served many purposes. Let us never forget the most important one of all. The square and the building is here to serve us, and we must do what we can as individuals to help tell its story, support it, and all the others that work so hard to keep the square and the building open to all of us.